I'd like to welcome everybody to this very special occasion. This is the inaugural Harriet Tubman Lecture and visiting professor in the Department of Surgery at the West Virginia University School of Medicine. And we're honored to have Wayne Frederick come give this important lecture for us. Wayne is a friend of Wayne, as you've read from our communications, is now interim president of the Howard University. And just last week, he was profiled in the New York Times, and we're all proud and pleased and daunted by the magnitude of his of the job and the challenges he faces. But first and foremost, he's an operating surgeon. He's got cases to do when he gets back, and he's a surgical oncologist. He is a son of Howard University. He was undergrad there. He was in the combined undergraduate and medical degree. And he did his residency there in surgery. He spent 4 years at the MD Anderson Cancer Center as a fellow in surgical oncology, and then returned. And in short order, he became director of the Howard University Cancer Center. He became provost for the health sciences, and just this past year, he became acting president of Howard University. He's the chair-elect of the surgical section of the National Medical Association, one of the stepping stones to surgical prominence in American surgery. He's a member of the Society of Black Academic Surgeons. He's a member of the Society of University Surgeons, the Southern Surgical Association. In short order, he'll be involved in leadership positions in those and other important American organizations. He's testified before Congress on health disparities and surgical outcomes, a topic of which he'll be speaking to us tonight and tomorrow morning at Surgical Grand Rounds. He's had more than $1 million of federal grants in the National Cancer Institute. He has a very important new program as far as navigation for residents of the District of Columbia to navigate the various programs in cancer care. We shared a panel, and that's how we became associated. And he has given me a lot of friendship, good advice, and he's come through for me on a lot of different occasions. Also in Macon, Georgia, as visiting professor there, where I had a similar program as far as addressing health disparities. I picked him up at Hartsfield-Jackson Airport in my car, and on the side of my car is a sticker. You remember this? A sticker that says Berklee School of Music, which is one of the top conservatories of jazz music in the U.S. And there Wayne was very dapper and well-dressed, and here I was, picking him up and putting a suitcase in my car. And it so happened at the same time there's an association of music teachers having a convention in Atlanta, and so naturally they did the racial stereotype and thought that Wayne was the executive and I was his trusty driver. And so he approached Wayne and said, "Can you please see this my student's resume? He really wants to go to the Berklee School of Music." And I thought that the irony was delicious at the time. So anyways, here's a good friend, and I hope a friend to the West Virginia University School of Medicine and Department of Surgery, Dr. Wayne Frederick. Thank you.
All right. Let me start by thanking Dr. Nakayama for his invitation. It's always a pleasure to visit. And if they realize that I can't sing or play a musical instrument, that never would have happened. I'm nowhere close to being that talented. I'm going to try to walk you through a talk today. This is, of all the talks that I give, this is probably one of my favorites because it really touches on quite a variety of topics. It's an unusual topic for surgical oncologists, but then by the time I'm finished this, you'll realize I'm probably an atypical surgeon. Obviously, this is the inaugural Tubman Lecture, and at Howard University, we have a building named after this woman at the Tubman Quadrangle, and that's where our female freshman students stay. And she obviously was many things. I've listed 3 things here, but she clearly was many things and certainly impacted Black America in a very, very important way. I'm going to start by discussing a very recent article. As I said, I've given this talk several times. I'll probably give it no less than 15 times this year across the country. And actually, at 2 international venues, I've been booked to give this particular talk. And people often send me editorials or articles that they think are pertinent to this talk right after I give the talk. I get no less than maybe 100 emails, regardless of the size of their audience. So some people are clearly enthusiastic and send me multiple emails. When you look at this article was written in the New York Times on January 25th. And the title and the topic was really around what drives success. And it was looking at it from, different backgrounds. And there were some observations made in this. Indian Americans earn almost double the national figure, was one of the statistics cited in here. And you can see Iranian, Lebanese, and Chinese Americans were also among the top earners. In the last 30 years, one of the observations was that Mormons have become leaders of corporate America, holding top positions in many of our recognizable organizations. If you look at the last bullet, while comprising only 2% of the U.S. adult population, Jews make up a third of the current Supreme Court, a third of our American Nobel laureates, and 2/3 of the Tony Award-winning lyricists and composers. Right? I think we make a lot of assumptions about talent, about background, but these are just actual facts. This is just the data. Comprehensive data from the Russell Sage Foundation in 2013 showed that the children of Chinese, Korean, and Vietnamese immigrants experience exceptional upward mobility regardless of their parents' socioeconomic or educational background. So even when their parents came to America, whether they can speak the language, whether they assimilated into the communities well, their ability to succeed was exceptional. One of my mentors attended this high school in New York, and we've had several conversations about his experience at this high school. And one of the biggest reasons we have a lot of conversations around it is because of their fundraising ability. But when I've looked in their annals at some of their graduates, it's an exceptional, a phenomenal school. He was shocked when I showed him this in terms of the change that has occurred in that school. And as you can see, 620 Asians attending now. The change in the demographic is pretty dramatic. When you look at pockets within the different communities, you also see some differences. So when you look at the African diaspora, you would see that Jamaicans, Ghanaians, and Haitians are climbing America's higher education ladder significantly. As a matter of fact, Nigerians, who make up less than 1% of the black population in the US, account for 25% of the blacks at Harvard Business School. And over a fourth of Nigerian Americans have a graduate or professional degree, as compared with only about 11% of whites in this country. Stunning statistic. Cuban Americans as well, if you look. By 1990, United States-born Cuban children whose parents had arrived as exiles were twice as likely as non-Hispanic whites to earn over $50,000 a year. Is there something different about these pockets that portend some type of success? All 3 Hispanic United States senators are Cuban Americans. Right? Again, is it something about their background that prepared them? When you look at the different groups, another thing that's important to see that we're beginning to see is group success in America often tends to dissipate after a couple generations. So there is something that is affecting sustainability of that initial success, regardless of how great the success is in that next generation. There's something that is not allowing that success to hold true. And again, this is just from the article. These are not my opinions in terms of what drives success. The authors of this article believe that cultural forces are at work. And these are the 3 things that they think are the traits. Superiority complex. When I'm talking to non-surgeons, I'm a little hesitant to put this slide up. But since I'm talking to surgeons, I'm comfortable putting this slide up. a superiority complex, a deep-seated belief in their exceptionality is one of the things. Now, it is hard to separate that from arrogance, but I can assure you, based on the discussion I've seen about this article, it is not arrogance. But it is that belief that one can be exceptional. The insecurity, that feeling that you or what you've done is not good enough, is another. And then the third one is impulse control. The ability to know when to avoid that bad decision. To take the risk, but to also know when it is the good opportunity to avoid making that bad decision. Interesting mix of those three things that could portend success. This is a picture of my mom. She, this year, I believe, on April 26, will celebrate her 45th year as a nurse. Wanted to become a physician. Her father, my grandfather, who was a school principal and then became a lawyer, didn't feel that women should become physicians, and therefore he sent her to nursing school. He is now resting in peace. I disagree with him. I didn't have the opportunity to disagree with him back then. And once I learned of the story, he was already resting in peace, so I'm going to leave him there. He had good intentions. This is the first faculty members at Howard University College of Medicine. I put this picture up because Howard University is a very unusual institution in this country. Chartered on March 2nd, 1867. And you have to think of when this occurred. In 1867, you had a faculty of a College of Medicine that was mixed, right? The gentleman to the left on the front row, A.T. Augusta, was one of the first faculty members, as was C.B. Purvis, who was another faculty member, was actually the first African American to treat a U.S. president, was involved in seeing a U.S. president who was injured. And that's a different story, but an interesting story because it tells us something about sepsis and surgery. Had a simple stab wound that should have been left alone, and had a few surgeons messing with the wound every day with their manured fingers, and needless to say, that president succumbed to sepsis eventually. Now, let's look at academic medicine of yesterday. The Flexner report, which was delivered by Abraham Flexner, I think was one of the most pivotal things that has happened in academic medicine. But it is one of the things that is not very well dissected in terms of what came of it. Very complicated report. I'm going to give you just a section of the report that I looked at. His charge was to improve the quality of medical education in this country. The feeling was that medical education in this country at that time was not of the best standard. And so his goal was to go around the United States of America and Canada and examine every medical school. Just imagine one person taking on that task today. Just the politics alone of that job would probably prevent that person from getting it done. But this is what he did back at the turn of the previous century. Entrance requirements and adherence to them, he wanted to look at the size and training of the faculty, the sum and allocation of endowment and fees to support the institution, adequacy of labs, etc. What he then decided was that there needed to be a reduction of the number of medical schools. Was one thing. He thought the annual output of physicians was too large. He recommended it go down from over 4,000 to 2,000. The number of medical schools overall decreased to 85, although he recommended a reduction even further. The number of medical students went from 28,000 to 13, and the percentage of schools requiring 2 years of college went from only 3 to 92. This single report reshaped how we went about medical education. But there were some important things in there that we rarely ever talk about. And I read this report back to back as I was researching this topic several years ago. It is clear that women show a decreasing inclination. was one of the things that he wrote in his report. The 7 medical schools for Negroes should be reduced to 2. Howard was one that he recommended should stick around, so I'll give him credit for that. Blacks, being a potential source of infection and contagion, needed their own physicians. Hygiene rather than surgery should be strongly accentuated in these schools. And as a result, by 1923, only 2 medical schools for blacks remained. Between 1920 and 1964, less than 3% of students entering American medical schools at that time were black as a result. Now, several things in there you could disagree with. I then go to our Moreland Spingarn Research Center, looking up the history of Howard's presidents and trustees, and what do I find out? Abraham Flexner was a member of Howard University's Board of Trustees from 1930 to 1936. More importantly, he was chairman of the Board of Trustees from 1932 to 1935, subsequent to putting out the Flexner report. Now, I read the report and I developed my own bias about Flexner. I have looked at several things that he did as a trustee member of Howard, and he truly had a love for Howard. And I definitely developed a different type of bias. So where are we today? We have 133 accredited US and 17 accredited Canadian medical schools, approximately 400 major teaching hospitals, as you see, and you can see the number of faculty members and medical students we currently have, and then resident physicians totaling over 100,000. When you look at the number of U.S. medical school applications by gender from 1982 to 2011, and previously this slide went to 2007, that gap with the decrease in women and the increase in the number of male applicants has been growing since then. The gap was closed at one point, but it has started to widen again, and I think it's something that our medical education system needs to look at. When you look at Howard's undergrad, 70% of my undergrad students are female and 30% are male. So that gap concerns me. Percentage of U.S. medical school applicants by race and ethnicity. You can see here again, blacks represent 7%, whites 55%, and Asians 20%. And this is that when you look at male and female within each of the groups, you would notice within each of the groups, looking at from 2005 to 2007, there is a wide difference between black females and black males applying to matriculating to medical school versus whites. Significant difference. And then when you look across other ethnic groups, you can see what that looks like in terms of the percentages. And I'll mention Asian Americans in a minute. The top 10 U.S. medical schools by number of applicants from blacks or African Americans in 2011. Howard University continues to produce the largest number of students getting black applicants. The top 11 undergraduate institutions supplying blacks or African Americans to U.S. medical schools, again, you can see the numbers, with University of Florida having a remarkable number. And you can see the total number of black applicants. Howard is, again, at the top in terms of that. When you look at actual matriculants, Howard University, again, based on our setup, last year we had about 7,500 applications for 115 spots. And this year we are on pace to outdo that number again. Meharry, you see at 79, Morehouse at 39, and then you can see the distribution of the rest of the schools. One interesting thing about this slide is that obviously both George Washington and University of Maryland are in the DMV area. I think this is remarkable, and Xavier University needs to be applauded for what they have done around health sciences education. When you look at the top 10 undergraduate institutions producing folks who go on to actually graduate from medical school, Xavier is at the top. They do not have a medical school on their campus. And despite that, their preparation of students, I think, is something that has to be commended. You can see they almost graduate twice the number that Howard does, despite the fact that we have a medical school on our campus. What about the faculty? Is this reflective of what the faculty looks like? And again, you can see 2.9% of the faculty are black, the majority are white, and I think Asians represent a significant part of the faculty makeup at this present time. Is it any different in dental school in terms of applications, etc.? And you can see here a slight decrease in the application pool among both blacks and whites recently. I think a significant decrease among Asians. We're not sure why, but when I talk to my dental school colleagues, they're concerned about this. We produce 21% of the black dentists in this country at Howard University. And you can see the numbers here in terms of total enrollment of black students. And it's a significant number. Meharry produces even more than us. Again, I think very important numbers when you look at the graduating classes. Again, very important numbers. Let's switch a little bit to, and these slides are courtesy Dr. Nakayama. We sat on a panel together about this topic, and I was very intrigued by these pieces of data that I'll regurgitate here to you. Asian Americans represent less than 5% of the population, but they represent over 20% of the medical school grads in this country currently. Surgical residents, they represent just about 17%. Surgical faculty, just over 10%. But look at how many are tenured surgical faculty, back to what they represent in the population. So there's something occurring in terms of their progress through the system. What about at the American College of Surgeons level when you look at the board of regents? There are 29 members currently. None of them would describe themselves as Asian Americans. Board of Governors, there are 272 members, 4 Asian Americans in that group. What about at the surgical board level, the American Board of Medical Specialties? You can see not a single Asian American is represented throughout those. So again, they're getting into medical school. They obviously are succeeding, but something is happening there. Dr. Cornwall is the chair of surgery at Howard University. He used to be at Hopkins. We have an outcomes research center, and he has a very strong collaboration with Johns Hopkins Outcomes Research Center in their surgery area. They did a study I'll share with you. This was published in JAMA. The purpose here was, like the general population, doctors may possess, I apologize for that misspelling, unconscious biases or preferences, and these may lead us to treat patients differently. To identify the presence of that unconscious bias among first-year medical students and to determine whether that implicit bias affects their clinical assessment of surgical patients. The entering class of 2013 and 2014 were asked to complete a web survey which included an implicit association test on race and social class, 8 clinical scenario vignettes, and direct questions regarding explicit race and socioeconomic class preferences. And again, remember, these were medical students just beginning, didn't have a class, hadn't seen a patient yet. And the vignettes were randomly set up. So occupation used, for example, may be a lawyer compared to a tool booth collector, etc. The analysis included a multiple logistic regression and correlation coefficients measured. Sample size was about 180 students. They had 211 total participants, 202 completed entire surveys, 52% of them were female. This is the breakdown of that class. 6.4% were African American, 53.7% white, and 30.9% Asian. So very similar to what we saw in terms of who is applying and getting into medical school in general. This was the age distribution. 76% of them were between ages 22 to 25. When looking at black versus white, and they tested the rapidity of the response in terms of good, very good if they had a positive impression of them versus negative impressions, this is what they found. both equally but clearly prefers white, there was a slight increase, 29% versus 4.1% prefer black. Looking at the implicit association test, again, very similar findings with a tendency towards the white patient. The explicit versus implicit race preferences, again, very similar distribution, whether it was explicit or implicit. Responses to the clinical vignettes. And these clinical vignettes included pain. They included whether they would assess the patient's ability to give informed consent. Patient reliability. The patient, for instance, they gave one of the vignettes, a patient was shot, came in and said that they were just randomly walking down the street. They were shot by somebody strange. The only difference was the patient was either black or white, and the patient reliability was tested based only on that. And again, you can see differences in terms of what the students taught. Now, in the clinical vignettes, there was not very much difference. So despite the preference difference that occurred in the implicit association test, in the vignettes, in terms of actually treating the patients, the students didn't seem to have much difference. So the implicit racial preferences are present, but these do not affect clinical decision making, at least among the students. They looked at class, upper versus lower class, again, preferences towards upper. Same thing with the implicit association test when you did class, same type of association, and it continued to be consistent. So a majority of medical students exhibit an unconscious bias preferring whites and upper social class in this study. Unlike data on physicians, these biases do not impact the assessment of surgical patients. Very interesting finding. Obviously, you need further studies to map this out. It would be interesting if we did this or could do this across all medical schools. And at Howard, we certainly are setting this up to do it at Howard because I'm curious to see what our students would do. Historically, black colleges and universities, I think, play a significant role in this country in our higher education system. 312,000 students attend HBCUs, and of this population, 79% are African American. They represent about 4% of all four-year institutions, but account for 21% of the bachelor's degrees that are awarded to African Americans in this country. 34% of the African Americans who receive bachelor's degrees in physics, chem, astronomy, maths, and biology earn them from HBCUs. And of the top 10 colleges whose African American graduates went on to get PhDs in science and engineering, the top 8 were HBCUs. And of the top 50 schools in the past decade or so that have sent black science and engineering doctorate recipients, Howard University was number 1 at 220. Significant number. Now, if you look at that list, you look in the top 10, you would see the schools that are in the top 10. And some of the powerhouses in this country certainly do contribute significantly. You see Harvard on that list at 15, Yale at 60. So clearly, lots of schools are contributing, but the HBCUs definitely are playing, I think, a very important role. When you look at you break them down into the different sciences, life sciences, physical sciences, social sciences, and engineering. Again, you see Howard is in the top 10 for each of those. I saw this slide of all places on Facebook, and I thought, this picture I should say, and I thought that this was interesting. Equality doesn't always mean justice. And I think that that's something that we have to think about when we try to work through these problems. We can create circumstances that give people an equal opportunity, but depending on where they're starting from, are we really creating a fair and just system? And that's one of the things that I'd like to talk about in terms of the future. I've outlined, what some of the differences are, and as you would imagine, being a surgical oncologist, I certainly have an opinion about some of the things that we can do to fix those. Education, research, clinical care, professionalism, quality, and leadership. I think these are some of the areas we have to focus on in the future of academic medicine. Let's start with education. Our academic medicine is built on a system that because we were taught it, we should teach it. Right? How many of us have had someone try to teach us something that we hope would never appear in a classroom ever again? Right? I'm sure everybody has had that experience. Because we were taught it, we should teach it. That's how our academic medicine is. Well, I have a 9-year-old son who's in 4th grade, and according to my wife, he was taught his math incorrectly because the way he was taught it and the way he solves his problem is not the way she does it. And therefore, when it's time to help him with homework, there's an issue in my house. Right? And the fact of the matter is, things change. We contemporize our educational system, and the way we were taught is not the way they are taught. If my iPad or iPhone gets stuck, I don't take it to my wife to undo it. Although she has a degree in computer science, I take it to my 9-year-old or my 7-year-old daughter. Right? And we all do that. They are visual, they're into technology, they interact differently when you present things to them. Right? They have a totally different system of how they go about learning. And that's just a fact of it. Our academic medicine needs stronger pedagogy to facilitate passing on our information to that next generation. It's the same thing in the operating room. Because you learn to do a complex operation does not mean you should teach someone to do it. Right? And again, I'm sure all of us have had that experience in the operating room. You've operated with surgeons who you think they're the greatest. They're skillful. They know what they're doing. They'll do an operation well. But that does not mean that they have learned to teach people how to operate. We have a new simulation center at Howard, and one of the focuses in that simulation center is how to train people to teach others to operate. Curriculum reform is necessary. I think we have to have a more focused undergrad preparation. At Howard, we just underwent our undergrad studies, and there was a big debate over a 1-credit course, and that was swimming. Blacks are 5 times more likely to drown than whites. So historically at Howard, you cannot graduate unless you take a swimming class. Right? That's not an elective. It's a mandatory 1-credit class you must take. The former mayor of Baltimore is my general counsel and serves as my interim provost, Mayor Schmoke. And he showed up, and being a former mayor of a city, very pragmatic, posed the question, why does everyone have to take swimming? Do people really learn to swim in that semester? So I went to the class because I myself got an excuse not to take swimming when I got my undergrad degree at Howard. So I didn't take it. Come to find out, quite a few people do that same thing as well. When you go and you look at the swimming class, almost everyone who takes that class learns to swim. But they learn to swim in the shallow where they can stand. Very few people who did not know how to swim when they take that swimming class can swim in the deep. Their fear of the water is not overcome by teaching that swimming class. So the objective of learning a life skill to save yourself, which is how they put it as to why it should be a mandatory class, is not achieved. And maybe there's something else we can do to achieve that. So I honestly think we have to have more focused undergrad preparation. Should we have a 4 versus a 6-year program? And by that I mean, I did a BSMD program at Howard. I did 2 years undergrad and 4 years of medical school. I started when I was 16. I went to medical school when I was 19. And I got my MD degree, my BS degree at 19, and I got my MD degree, I just said my BS degree at 20 and my MD degree at 22. I was young. I understand that. However, that focused preparation, I am not sure from a technical competence point of view, those extra 2 years of undergrad, that I missed something that would have better prepared me for the technical aspects of my education in medical school. And with a shortage of physicians in this country, we have to beg the question, is our undergrad, as expensive as it is today, really the best preparation to go to medical school, spending those 4 years? I won't make any public remarks about humanities, fine arts, etc. because I think that's a totally different topic. I think there are different things we have to add into the curriculum. I became the Associate Dean for Clinical Affairs at Howard in the medical school and decided to go and get my MBA, which I did in 2011. And I did it because I was tired of sitting across from people who would give me an Excel spreadsheet and then look at me as if I had no clue what I was about to talk about. And then when I did make a comment, they would dismiss it without explanation, simply because they had numbers on an Excel spreadsheet that they felt I couldn't understand. The flip side of that is I have also sat opposite many a physician who did not understand the numbers on a spreadsheet, but because we are so highly intelligent, we are loath to tell people we don't understand. Right? So physicians are one of the largest single groups that are defrauded every year. And I think a lot of it has to do with that reason. People say things to them and they just respond that they understand because you're so highly intelligent as is, you don't want to get into a conversation where somebody has to walk you through something complicated. And if you ever think I am wrong about this, accompany a physician to buy a car. Many of my colleagues are physicians. I've accompanied many of them to buy a car. And every single time when we leave, I ask them one simple question. Tell me what the interest rate was for the loan you just signed. And I've not had a single friend able to tell me what the interest rate was. Think about every time you've gone to buy a car. You signed 50 sheets of paper in less than 10 minutes. Nobody explains, nobody sits, nobody pulls out a calculator on your side of the table and goes through. And even the process. Why do you have to meet one guy who goes and talks to the other guy and comes back and talks to you? Why can't you go talk to the guy he's going to go talk to? Right? I'm just curious. I've always been curious as to what it is he's going to go tell that guy on my behalf that I can't go tell that guy. I'm my best advocate. Let me go in the room. So I always tell them, when they get up to leave the room, I get up and walk behind them. I once bought a car for my wife. It took 20 minutes because I researched everything. I printed it out. I got to the dealership, and I told the guy, listen, this is not going to be complicated. I've got to be somewhere at 6. It's 5:20. This is what I want. This is the interest rate. Unless you're going to sign this now, I'm not going to discuss this with you. And I want to speak to the guy. I don't want to talk to you. And it worked. Longitudinal professional curriculum. We have to have, our system changes so rapidly that unless we meet the challenges of our system by educating ourselves on a frequent basis about topics that are pertinent, I think we lose an opportunity. And with this, I think interprofessional education is important. If you can get groups around a topic, we have a pharmacy school, a medical school, a dental school, nursing and allied health sciences at Howard. The first time my physicians write a prescription should not be the first time they interact with a pharmacist. You go into school with people right across the street from you. You should be interacting with them so you understand what their issues are. And I think the more we create that environment, the better. We have an ethics class that all of our health professionals participate in, and I think that this is something about our medical education we should encourage. I think we have to get into our communities more and having an adoption of local families by faculty and students where both faculty and students can follow those families longitudinally and understand some of the social determinants of health, I think would help our system better. I think research is important. I tell every student that research is not just being at a bench. When you go out and practice, your own internal examination of what it is you do, why you do it, and can you do it better is research. But you should learn the principles of how to apply that to your circumstance. You cannot, if I were to take everything I learned at MD Anderson Cancer Center and bring it back to Howard University, I would not succeed. Right? Because on any given day, I could go to a clinic at MD Anderson and see 80 patients with melanoma. 80. At Howard University, in my 5 years of residency, I treated 2 patients with melanoma. At MD Anderson on the MEL-SAC service, every Tuesday and Thursday I had clinic. I saw 80 patients every session with melanoma, and I operated on no less than 10 patients every other day, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. So in a week, melanoma was an epidemic in Houston. At Howard, it was a totally rare phenomenon. The patient that shows up at Howard to get treated for melanoma is going to have a totally different experience. So you have to adapt to the environment that you're in as well. I think instruction on grant writing is important. We have not emphasized this in our curriculum, but I think it's one that we have to. And I think quality is going to be important. We have to be more transparent about data. I think this is very, very important. If we do that more openly and more willingly, I think we will succeed. We are very, very covert about our data. And I think that that's something that we have to overcome. Now, we live in a litigious environment. That's not beyond me. But I think to forward and progress the practice of medicine, this is something we must embrace. I think leadership training is extremely important. We have to train people to lead. We have started summer fellowships with shadow opportunities for our health sciences students. And I think that that's something that we have to do it. I think we have to do it at the staff development level. And I have a faculty development task force aimed at getting my instructors and assistant professors to full professors. We are going to roll out a digital portfolio to allow them to continually move their progress on their professional career along. And everyone will have a mentoring committee. And that mentoring committee will meet with them every fall and spring for the purpose of, A, giving them feedback, but also going to their chairs and their deans to advocate for them. How often does that junior assistant professor come in and take every other night call, do a myriad of things, and isn't writing? And then when it's time for promotion, the very same people who didn't want to take the call, who she was giving a break to, are then sitting in a room deciding that she hasn't participated in enough scholarships, so she shouldn't be promoted. That's not a fair system. And I think post-tenure review needs to be a part of that as well. Now, the pipeline is important. And how do we affect the pipeline? We have a middle school on our campus. And I think it's one of the best decisions that was made at Howard University. It is a charter school. 2/3 of the students enter performing below the grade level. And since it was founded in 2005, on the state-mandated standardized assessments, has consistently been in the top 5%. 95% African American, 5% Latino Hispanic is the makeup of the students. The school is literally next to this building, which is our marquee building on our campus. That's Founders Library. And the school is just to the left of that. In our Howard Magazine winter edition, we have them featured on our cover. 95% of the entering class, the first class, attended college. 2 of those students actually finished high school 1 year early. So just by having a very focused curriculum around math and science, these students were put on a path, despite coming in performing at below grade level, put on a path to be interested in college. And I also believe that coming to school on a university campus was a big influence because they saw it every single day. Nearly 50% of them from the class of 2009 are majoring in a STEM field as well. And they also did very well in terms of earning scholarships and so on. So I really think that this is a very important part of what needs to be done. We have a teacher education program around STEM as well, with a new Bachelor of Science in Elementary Education with STEM as an emphasis. And as I stated before, you saw the PhD numbers. Our 2013 graduating class included 96 PhD recipients, which is the largest number of minority PhD recipients. So again, looking at that class is very important. I have to put a slide up because we had someone get on the web, Julian Malvo, who has a blog, and she stated that Howard's 2013 entering class had no black males. So as you can imagine, my alum, the media, were all over us. And that's just not true. I had to take a picture of the class, blow it up, make a poster size, and take it to every meeting with me just to prove that we had black males in the class. but they comprise about 35% of the class. We continue to have a BSMD program as well. And this summer we will start an MCAT prep program targeting students from other HBCUs. There are a couple of proposals I have on board now that are coming through the system, and hopefully I'll present to my board of trustees as early as our April board meeting. There is a ballooning number of students in terms of enrollment at community colleges, at our 3 institutions. I think that's a good thing. The problem is the graduation rates are not good. And then when you look at the job placement rates, they're even worse. Now, some of the students who are choosing to go there are doing so because of economic reasons, not because of aptitude. So one of the things we're looking at is, can we create programs that will get them to a JD, MD, and PhD? We often try to bring them into 4-year institutions to get their Bachelor of Science. And I'm not sure that that's always the right thing. I think we have to push them beyond what they see as their opportunity and give them greater opportunities to go on to achieve things in professional schools. Our graduation rate for those transfer students coming in from community college is better than my cohort of first-time in college students. And I think that they actually get a bit of a stress test at community college. So by the time they get the requirements that are necessary to get in to Howard University, they actually are now have self-selected themselves for success. But I think we have a responsibility to open up their possibilities and really push them to things that we don't traditionally put in front of them. And so we're trying to set up some programs and affiliation agreements with community colleges that would see these students come in and go straight to getting a JD, MD, and PhD. I'm also working on a dual enrollment program for high school student enrollment, where we would admit students to Howard in their junior year of high school. And the purpose here is to get them, again, on that track to college early, get them into the system. And throughout the country, the number of institutions participating in these is growing significantly. And I think that these dual enrollment programs will certainly provide students an opportunity to reduce the time required, because one of my concerns is cost. Cost clearly is a prohibitive issue, and I think if we can decrease that issue, we'll get there. So I think we have to focus on education, research, and clinical care. There's no doubt about it. But we certainly have to make sure we do that with strong leadership, high quality, and we cannot compromise on professionalism. These 3 people, for one reason or the other, have meant a lot to me. I mentioned to you my mom, who has been a nurse. I actually was born with sickle cell, so my mom stayed near the main hospital in Trinidad for 6 months. She and my dad, they got an apartment there so that she could actually take care of me. I was admitted probably 4 times a year growing up. My mom would actually change her shift and spend the night at the hospital when I was hospitalized. So I can't say enough about the dedication that she had. She wanted 3 sons. She had 7 pregnancies to get 3 sons, 4 miscarriages. She was that determined to have 3 sons. I'm not sure why she was so obsessed about the idea of having 3 sons. She wanted one to become the prime minister of the country, because she was so enamored by the prime minister of my country, who was a political science professor at Howard at one point. She wanted one to become a pilot. I'm a bit apprehensive about heights. And she wanted one to become a physician. And so I told her that I've ticked that box and my job is done. The other 2 guys got to do something else. The gentleman in the middle is Charles R. Drew. And he is the one who is credited with this statement: excellence of performance will transcend artificial barriers created by man. A lot has been said about him. Some of the history that has been written about him is incorrect. He died in an unfortunate car accident in North Carolina. And people question the fact that he bled to death, although he was the man who came up with how we should preserve plasma. People felt that because he died in North Carolina in a car accident, he wasn't afforded the kind of care that he should have. The next gentleman on the right, Dr. Fall, my mentor, actually went to that hospital and spoke to a nurse who was on duty that night. He got the best care that could be afforded to him at that time. And unfortunately, he had massive injuries from which he didn't survive. The next gentleman, Dr. LaFall, is my mentor. He, in my opinion, is one of the greatest surgeons who has ever lived. He has been the president of every major surgical society in this country. But more importantly, he is a gentleman, and for that I truly admire him. This is a picture of Howard's commencement on June 7, 1957, and this year being a special year, 50th anniversary of the March on Washington. It is amazing to me that in 1957, Howard would afford 2 honorary degrees to those 2 gentlemen, Jackie Robinson and Martin Luther King Jr., in the same year. What I would have done to be at that commencement. I was at this gentleman's honorary degree presentation when I got my medical school degree in '94. A few months later, he received an honorary degree at Howard, and I think with his passing, we have certainly lost one of the world's giants. I show you this picture because when I give this talk about unconscious bias, it is all around us. None of us are above this. I made this slide, and as I often do before I give a talk, I have my wife come by and look mainly for aesthetics. And the first time I made this slide, and ironically enough, the TV image in the back is Barack Obama giving one of his speeches during the primary in 2008 was when I made this slide. My wife came and said, the title of your talk is Unconscious Bias in Academic Medicine. Your son is dressed in surgical garb. Your daughter is dressed in a sweatshirt like a cheerleader. Right? You're giving a talk on unconscious bias in academic medicine. I can't be judge and jury. So I hope that I was able to stimulate your thoughts about it, but hopefully the future of academic surgery would include my daughter, who is left-handed, and I think left-handed surgeons are more talented. Thanks for your attention. Thank you.
We have time for questions, obviously. Any comments? Yes.
What surprised you the most about your research?
You know, I can't say I was as much surprised by the research as much as I was surprised at my reaction to it. When I first reviewed Flexner's report in detail, I was pretty shocked at some of the statements he made and the fact that no one had ever mentioned those things to me before, that he felt, you know, that blacks should only take care of blacks, etc. I was really surprised. And then when I found out he was a Howard Board of Trustee member, I was just totally stunned. But the advocacy he had for Howard University in terms of at the congressional level and so on was bar none. I mean, he was a strong advocate for bringing resources to the university. And I think that says a lot about us in general because of how we interpret things that we hear, how the media influences our opinions about people. And I think it always warrants us stepping back a little bit and taking a little deeper look before we make some of those strong remarks or opinions that we sometimes, or conclusions we sometimes come to.
Thank you so much for coming. We're really very grateful for this. There's so many questions, but you know, you have done a nice job in representing Flexner. You've shown very well that so much of what you said now is just so outdated and just so long. And yet so much of what we do in medical education continues to be what Flexner called for all those years ago. And something's not changed. You've clearly tried to affect a change at Howard. You've got some creative programs. But I'm struck by your equality and your justice picture. And it makes me think of the saying that the best time to plant a tree was 10 years ago. And I'm not sure that if we wait until the students are actually in medical school that we're going to solve any of this. And you've addressed that in middle school. There are two questions about that. The first of which is, it's middle school. Do do they just then go to their local high school after the middle school, or do you then funnel them into selected high schools? Are you now moving in the direction with which you're creating on campus and now making this a middle school through high school into university experience? And lastly, is middle school early enough, or do we need to be doing it even before?
Great questions. So I'll take let me deal with the first one. They go to all varieties of high school, private and public school system. And despite where they go, their interest in college, how they perform in the SAT is the same because of whatever occurred in the middle school. We buy each of them a laptop. It's often the first laptop in the family. The parents have to participate. There's a requirement where they have to come to a certain number of parent-teacher association meetings, etc., for the kid to stay in the school. And so that parent engagement, I think, is equally important as well. They have to sign off on their homework, all of those types of things, whether they understand it or not. The point is we are trying to force them to have some type of interaction and engagement, and I think that that's important. Now, we are looking at expanding into a high school for the purpose that you mentioned. Now, I have to admit that my bias is that I would like to dually enroll them in college their freshman year of high school. And therefore, when they finish high school, my goal is to create a cadre of students who would have just about finished college at the same time. Now, you would have to pick a select group to do that, there's no doubt. But I think a lot of these students can. I think it's about motivation, it's about direction, and it's about getting them engaged in certain types of activities that will afford them the tools to succeed. And I think we can do that. I think the fact that we took them performing less than grade level and got them to college says a lot about their capacity despite not interacting with them in high school. And I think if we are able to interact with them in high school on a college campus, I think you give them that opportunity. I also think it will beg the question of higher education, our higher education system, which, as I said, is extremely costly. And we've gotten everybody into this mindset of spending 4 years of $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 a year. I'm not sure that that's the right thing. And I say that as a college president without any reservation. Is middle school too early? Is it early enough? Part of the question was high school too late? Right? So we said middle school. Now I'll tell you, my 9-year-old son, I took him to make rounds with me when I was at the University of Connecticut from the time he was about 3 months. I would push the stroller around while I would make rounds. I didn't do the same thing with my 7-year-old daughter. And this is a very simple, non-randomized study that I did in my household. My 9-year-old son is extremely compassionate, concerned about others. He would make rounds with me 2 weeks later, ask about that patient he saw in bed 6 in the ICU. I mean, it's incredible. Even today, if I take him to make rounds, he will always ask about the sickest patients he saw, the guy on the ventilator. If something happens to someone on the television, he is totally sucked into the story. When Michael Jackson died, we had to turn the TV off. He wanted to know everything about propofol. How could a doctor kill a guy? I mean, it was incredible. My 7-year-old daughter, the world revolves around her. There is no mistaking that. She is, and don't get me wrong, she's not mean, but she is clear. The universe, the entire axis pivots around her. And not in a bad way. Just everybody needs to stop and recognize that, and once everybody recognizes that, we're all fine. She is the one that I didn't make rounds with. My wife always points this out. She's very kind to others, but she has a different level. And even when I make rounds with her now, she wants to get back to the car as quickly as possible so we can go shopping or do something else. Just a random act. I say that because I am of the firm belief that the experiences we have very early on can dictate who and what we become. I wanted to become a physician because I had sickle cell. And not because I was sick, But as a 3-year-old, I overheard my grandmother explaining to friends that I probably wasn't going to live long because I have sickle cell. And according, as she tells the story, I then stopped her, asked her what sickle cell was. She tried to explain, and then I told her I would find a cure for it. It wasn't because I was ill, but just because I had an experience hearing a conversation, listening to that, seeing my mom getting dressed to go to school, go to work. That early experience, my mom hates surgery. It's the only type of nursing she would not do. When I told her I was going to become a surgeon, she was disappointed. It's the only type of surgery, but something about that early experience, her bringing home surgical masks. So I honestly believe our environment influences what we do. And if you expose kids, and it doesn't have to be formal. A lot of times we think about just the usual education, instructional environment in a classroom. I don't think it's that. I think if you just give them the exposures where they develop some concern about humanity, some compassion, you stimulate a lot of other things in them. You take them to soup kitchens. I take my kids to donate clothes in the winter. So although I always say these things about my daughter, she gets that other part of her concern from other activities. She's not into the medicine thing, although I still think she'll be a great left-handed surgeon. I'm going to convince her.
I also really enjoyed the talk. I really appreciate all of the statistics behind the advice. We have an opportunity here. I love your advice, but I'd also like to open it up to the rest of the audience because I think we'll be putting you on the spot way too much. Here we have in West Virginia a program that puts out about 150 kids from high school, of which 30% of them are African American, 73% of them are the first in their families to go to college, 63% are financially disadvantaged families, and we don't have but one kid in our medical school right now. They go to college 96% of the time. They have their way paid through medical school. Where does it fall down? They get through college. Where it falls down is how to get them into professional school. We have communities working together to push these kids this way, and yet we don't have an effective way to get them into medical school, dental school, pharmacy school. They have tuition and fee waivers all the way through. How can we do that when we have all these kids coming through yearly and we're missing the boat? How do we fix this?
Let's have Dr. Frederick comment on that, and then we have another event that we have to get into.
I'll give a stab at that. I think one of the things that I have seen in the students who come to Howard is that early exposure. All of our medical school applicants have to write a supplemental application, and on that, the application calls for you to talk about either your willingness to serve a disadvantaged community or something about your background that was disadvantaged. And I would say 9 times out of 10, students write about an experience with a physician that they had, where they shadowed someone or they had an injury and that person took more of an interest in them other than just applying care to them. So I think that early exposure is one of the things. Most of the times, these kids are not looking beyond their human possibilities. I came to this country as a 16-year-old. I was 5'6", 88 pounds, with a chronic illness, no family in D.C. But my mother had a dream that I would become a physician, and she supported that dream fully. When I look at parents I speak to now, if one of them bought me that 5'6", 88 pound kid with only tuition and fees for the first year, my advice would probably be, you need to take this young man back home and wait until you get, the right setup. But she convinced me that that's something that I could do. And I think we have to expose these kids early and often. I think if you have a program here where you bring them, even if it's a summer, we have a Med Then Start program at Howard. We bring the kids for 1 week out to the DC public school system. And I think also if people stay in touch with them is another big thing. When they're applying to college, somebody stays in touch with them. or somebody contacts them just before they are going to graduate from college. Those types of things I think also make a big difference. The other thing that I would mention as well, which I think is often an error we make, is that the mentorship does not have to come from people who have had their experience or look like them. I think that's another error we tend to make. We tend to assume that the only people that can communicate to them effectively or convince them have to look like them. And that's another thing that I don't believe in as well. In a different version of this talk, two of my mentors from MD Anderson are two people that I am very close to. They're two Jewish guys. I knew nothing about kosher when I got to MD Anderson. And one of the things that they took the time to teach me about was kosher. It may sound simple, but I tell all of my friends who are African American, tell me what kosher is now. And they all, fumble around that because, again, it's a word we use a lot, right? We all assume we know what it means, but we don't. If you stop and ask and you spend that type of time interacting with people, you would be amazed at how many things you can expand your own knowledge and myths about. And I think with those types of kids you're talking about, those are some of the things they need to come and see. They need to come and see a physician picking up the phone to call his or her family to let them know they'll be late for dinner, to see that they have lives outside of just medicine. And I think that just all of those things make a big difference.
I think in closing, I think this is a great inaugural.
You want me to take one?
One of the slides that was brought up at the workshop, I think that was a great idea. Because you could have knowledge, you still have to do well at that exam. So I don't know, do we have an MCAT workshop here that they do at College? Okay.
Yeah, taking standardized tests is important. Dr. Fall, who I showed you, in 1948, graduated from what was then known as Florida A&M College. He was 18, graduated #1 in his class, 4.0 GPA, and didn't perform well on standardized tests. Didn't do well on the MCAT. Could only apply to 2 medical schools in this country, Meharry and Howard. Applied to both and didn't get into either. His college president felt so strongly about him, he drove to DC to petition the admissions office to let him into medical school. And as I always tell my Meharry friends, tough luck, right? He went to Howard and graduated #1 in his class, and the rest is history. But he did not get that chance by taking a standardized test well. So to your point,